I don't even recognize you anymore? Her words sliced through me like ice-cold knives as conversations around us at neighboring tables fell silent. My mother's voice had that particular cutting quality that could make an entire restaurant pause and stare. My name is Emma Wilson. I'm 29, living in Boston, and tonight was supposed to be a chance at reconciliation. After 3 years of minimal contact, my mother had invited me to dinner at a family-owned Italian restaurant downtown that I'd never been able to afford on my teacher's salary. When her text came through last week, I'd stared at my phone for 20 minutes, my thumb hovering over the reply button while my heart raced. Just dinner, Emma. It's been too long, she'd written. As if the last time we'd spoken hadn't ended with her telling me I was throwing my life away teaching other people's ungrateful children, instead of pursuing the law career she'd mapped out for me since birth. The hostess had seated us at a table near the center of the dining room, under a wrought-iron chandelier that cast a warm glow over white tablecloths and gleaming silverware. Mother had arrived first, punctual as always, dressed in a tailored navy suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Her silver hair was swept into an immaculate chignon, not a strand out of place. Meanwhile, I'd come straight from school in my best blazer, which had a small coffee stain on the sleeve that I'd tried to hide by folding my arms. You could have at least dressed properly, she'd said instead of hello, her eyes sweeping over my outfit with the practiced evaluation of someone who'd spent her life judging others. This is a respectable establishment. I should have walked out then, but some childish part of me, the part that still desperately wanted her approval, had made me sit down and unfold my napkin with trembling hands. For 15 minutes, things had been awkwardly civil. She'd asked surface-level questions about my apartment too small, my neighborhood too dangerous, and whether I was dating anyone still single. At your age, I was already married to your father and making partner at the firm. I'd swallowed my retorts with sips of water, reminding myself that I was an adult now, that her opinions couldn't hurt me anymore. What a lie that was! Everything changed when our waiter approached, a tall man with kind eyes and a gentle smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. His name tag read Daniel. "Are you ladies ready to order?" he asked, his voice warm and professional. Before I could speak, Mother answered, "I'll have the seared scallops to start, followed by the filet mignon, medium rare." I glanced at the prices and felt my stomach clench. The entree alone was $6. I'd checked my bank account before coming. I had exactly $127.34 to last until next payday. I scanned the menu for the least expensive option. "And for you?" Miss Daniel asked, turning to me. "I'll just have the house salad, please," I said, closing the menu. Mother's eyebrows shot up. "A salad? That's not a proper dinner, Emma." "I'm not very hungry," I lied, ignoring the fact that I'd skipped lunch to grade papers. "Don't be ridiculous." "She'll have the scallops as well, and the salmon for her main course," Mother told Daniel, who glanced at me uncertainly. "Actually, just the salad is fine," I insisted. Daniel nodded. "Of course. Would you like any dressing on the side?" "House vinaigrette, please." As he walked away, Mother's lips thinned into a familiar line of disapproval, still with the ridiculous frugality. "I thought you'd have outgrown that by now." "It's called living within my means," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's called lacking ambition," she countered. "You could have been something, Emma. Instead, you're what? Grading finger paintings and living paycheck to paycheck." "I teach 6th grade English, Mother. Not kindergarten." "As if that makes a difference." She took a sip of her water, ice cubes clinking against the crystal. "Your father and I gave you every advantage. The best schools, connections at the top firms. And you threw it all away for what? To make 25 cents above minimum wage." Each word was a familiar barb. I'd heard variations of this speech since the day I'd told her I was changing my major from pre-law to education. But tonight, in this restaurant where everything gleamed with a luxury I couldn't afford, they stung more than usual. "I make a difference in my students' lives," I said quietly. She scoffed. "You could have made a difference arguing landmark cases. Instead, you're babysitting other people's mistakes." That's when the tears threatened. I blinked them back furiously, refusing to cry in front of her. "Not again. They're children, not mistakes. Don't get emotional." It's Her voice sharpened as Daniel returned with a basket of warm bread and placed it between us. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. This, fragility. This isn't how I raised you. Daniel hesitated, clearly sensing the tension. Can I get you ladies anything else while you wait for your appetizers? We're fine, Mother snapped without looking at him. He nodded and retreated, throwing me a sympathetic glance that made me want to sink through the floor. Great. Now, even the waitstaff pitied me. I don't even recognize you anymore, Mother continued once he was out of earshot, her voice carrying across nearby tables. Where is the ambitious girl who graduated top of her class, who was going to become the youngest partner at Wilson and Green? Who was going to carry on your father's legacy? The restaurant had grown quieter. I could feel eyes on us on Miaz. My face burned with humiliation, that old, familiar feeling of being small, of being insufficient, washed over me. It didn't matter that I was nearly 30. In her presence, I was still the disappointing daughter who had failed to fulfill the destiny she'd planned. That was never me, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. That was the daughter you wanted, not the one you had. Don't be dramatic, she dismissed, waving a manicured hand. I simply wanted what was best for you. No, you wanted what was best for your image. Her eyes flashed. Watch yourself, or what? The words escaped before I could stop them. You'll cut me off. You already did that. You'll tell me what a disappointment I am. You've been doing that my entire life. Mother's face hardened into the expression I'd grown up fearing: cold, implacable judgment. If you're quite finished with your little tantrum, perhaps we can have a civilized dinner. Daniel appeared with Mother's scallops and my salad, setting them down carefully. Here we are, ladies. Enjoy. Thank you, I murmured, unable to meet his eyes. Mother cut into a scallop with surgical precision. I didn't come here to argue, Emma. I came because I have news. I pushed a cherry tomato around my plate. What news? I'm retiring. The firm is throwing a gala next month. As my daughter, you're expected to attend. She said it as a statement, not a request. Wear something appropriate. I'll have my assistant send you the details. The implied criticism that I wouldn't know what appropriate meant without her guidance wasn't lost on me. I have parent-teacher conferences that week. I lied. I had no idea when the gala was, but I knew I couldn't bear an entire evening of being paraded in front of her colleagues, all of them knowing I was the daughter who'd disappointed. Reschedule them, she said dismissively. This is important, Emma. There will be people there you should meet. People who could help you if you're finally ready to give up this phase and get a real career. And just like that, we were back where we always ended up. My life choice is a temporary aberration she was still waiting for me to outgrow. I set down my fork. It's not a phase. It's my life, my career. I'm good at what I do, and I love it. Love doesn't pay bills, she said coldly. Or is there something you're not telling me? Some wealthy benefactor supporting your little teaching hobby? Because the Emma I knew was always practical. The insinuation hit like a slap. Are you asking if I have a sugar daddy? Don't be crude, she hissed. I'm simply trying to understand how you survive in a city like Boston on what amounts to charity wages. I budget, I have roommates, I tutor on weekends. My voice rose despite my best efforts. And I don't need your approval or your money to validate my choices. Clearly, she said, her gaze flicking pointedly to my coffee-stained blazer. Though a bit of my money for a decent wardrobe wouldn't hurt. That was the moment something inside me snapped. All the years of trying to measure up, of never being enough, of bending myself into shapes that weren't mine to please her, it all came rushing up like a tidal wave. I can't do this anymore, I said, dropping my napkin on the table and standing up. I thought maybe time had changed things, that maybe you'd finally see me for who I am instead of who you wanted me to be, but you haven't changed at all. Mother's eyes widened with genuine shock. In all our arguments, I'd never walked away from her. Emma, you're making a scene. Sit down. No, I said, grabbing my purse. I'm making a choice. I'm choosing not to let you make me feel small anymore. If you walk out that door, she began, her voice low with warning. You'll what? Disown me. Again, I let out a humorless laugh. Go ahead. It didn't break me the first time, and it won't break me now. As I turned to leave, my heel caught on the leg of the chair. I stumbled, knocking into a passing server who was carrying a tray of drinks. Glass shattered. Red wine splashed across the pristine white tablecloth and onto Mother's immaculate navy suit. The restaurant fell completely silent. Mother stood, wine dripping from her sleeve, her face a mask of cold fury. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Careless, irresponsible, causing damage wherever you go. The words hit their mark with practiced precision. I stood frozen, mortified, as the manager rushed over with napkins, apologizing profusely to Mother as if the disaster were the restaurant's fault and not mine. "I'm sorry," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was apologizing for the spill or for being such a perpetual disappointment. Without another word, I fled toward the exit, tears blurring my vision. Behind me, I could hear Mother's voice, clear and carrying, always running away from her problems. Just like her father. The final twist of the knife comparing me to the man who'd abandoned us both when I was 12. I pushed through the door into the cool evening air and gulped it down like I was drowning. 3 steps away from the restaurant, a hand touched my shoulder. I spun around, ready to tell Mother to leave me alone, but it was Daniel, the waiter, slightly out of breath like he'd rushed after me. "Ma'am, wait," he said, glancing back at the restaurant. "I just thought I needed to tell you something." I wiped at my eyes, beyond embarrassed. "I'm so sorry about the wine. Please tell your manager. I'll pay for any damages. I can send the money." "No, it's not about that," he interrupted, his kind eyes serious. "It's about your mother. Look, whatever she told you, she paid for everything," he said in a low voice, "before you even arrived." I stared at him, not comprehending. "What?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "She came in an hour early, ordered both your meals in advance, paid the bill with a very generous tip. I might add asked that we bring out exactly what she'd ordered regardless of what you requested. The world seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I don't understand. She knew you'd order something inexpensive," he explained gently. "She told us you'd try to be noble and get the cheapest thing on the menu. Said it was ... How did she put it? A stubborn streak she'd never been able to break. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. She ... planned all of this, the entire argument." Daniel looked uncomfortable. "I don't know about that part, but she definitely planned to pay for an expensive meal for you regardless of what you ordered. And she was insistent that you not know." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He hesitated. "Because the way she spoke to you in there. My mom used to talk to my sister like that, and my sister never knew that behind all that criticism, there was, I don't know, something else. Something complicated." He ran a hand through his hair. "Look, I could get fired for this, but I thought you should know." Before I could respond, the restaurant door opened. Daniel quickly stepped back. "Just think about it," he said, then turned and walked briskly back inside. I stood there on the sidewalk, people streaming past me, trying to make sense of what he'd told me. Mother had paid in advance, had ordered for me before I even arrived, had known exactly how I would react. What did that mean? That she knew me better than I thought, or that she'd orchestrated the entire humiliating evening, knowing exactly which buttons to push to make me react? I wrapped my arms around myself as the evening chill seeped through my thin blazer. For the first time in years, I found myself completely uncertain about how to feel about my mother. I started walking, not toward the tea station that would take me home, but aimlessly, through streets growing darker as the last of the sunset faded from the sky. My phone buzzed in, my probably mother, furious about the scene I'd caused. I ignored it. She'd paid for everything. The meal I hadn't eaten, the wine now staining her expensive suit, the scene I'd made. What was I supposed to do with that information? Behind me, the lights of Marcello's grew smaller, but the weight of the evening and the waiter's whispered revelation followed me like a shadow into the gathering darkness. 3 days after the disaster at Marcello's, I still couldn't shake the waiter's words from my mind. She paid for everything. Those four simple words had unraveled what I thought I knew about my mother, leaving me with questions I couldn't answer and feelings I couldn't name. My apartment to second floor walk-up in Jamaica Plain that I shared with Zoe, a nurse at Boston Children's, felt especially small that morning. Rain streaked the windows, turning the world outside into a gray blur. I sat at our tiny kitchen table, staring into a mug of coffee gone cold, my phone face down beside me. "You look like hell," Zoe said, emerging from her bedroom in scrubs, her curly hair pulled back in a ponytail. She grabbed a banana from the fruit bowl and leaned against the counter, still thinking about the dinner from hell. I'd told her everything when I'd finally made it home that night, stumbling through the door past 11 after walking for hours. My feet blistered from my rarely worn heels. I'd collapsed on our threadbare couch and spilled the whole humiliating story right up to Daniel's revelation. "I don't know what to think anymore," I admitted, pushing the cold coffee away. "For 3 years, I've had this image of her as this cold, unfeeling woman who threw me away because I didn't fit her plan. And now, and now, you're wondering if there's more to the story," Zoe finished, taking a bite of her banana. "Maybe. Or maybe she's just playing some new psychological game." I ran a hand through my unwashed hair. I'd called in sick yesterday. I never did able to face a classroom of 6th graders while my emotional equilibrium was so shattered. "She hasn't even called, after all that, not a single call or text." Zoe tossed her banana peel in the trash. "Haven't you blocked her number since the big blow-up 3 years ago?" I felt heat rise to my face. "Yes, but I'd forgotten that detail in my spiral of confusion." "I love you, but you're being a little ridiculous," Zoe said, grabbing her jacket from the hook by the door. "You've spent 3 years telling me what a manipulative nightmare your mother is. One cryptic comment from a waiter doesn't erase that." "I know, but nothing. Look, I've got a 12-hour shift, but when I get back, we're opening a bottle of wine and making a pro-con list about whether you should unblock the dragon lady. Until then, take a shower. You're starting to smell like regret and confusion." She gave me a quick hug. "Love you. Don't do anything stupid before I get home." After she left, the apartment fell into silence, broken only by the patter of rain against the windows. I picked up my phone, staring at the black screen like it might offer answers. The truth was, I didn't need to unblock her to contact her. I still had her email, her office number, her home address, avenues of communication I'd left untouched for 3 years out of pride or fear, or some combination of both. With a sigh, I unlocked my phone and opened my email. Her address was still in my contacts. EGREENE@wilsongreen.com. Professional, impersonal. Just like her. I started typing, deleted it all, started again. 5 attempts later, I had written, "Mother, I think we should talk about the other night, about the last 3 years, about everything." Emma. Simple? Direct? Terrifying. My thumb hovered over the send button for a full minute before I finally pressed it, then set the phone down as if it might burn me. Done. For better or worse, the first move had been made. I didn't expect an immediate response. Mother had never been one to drop everything to answer emails, especially from me, so I forced myself to shower, to dress, to eat something other than cold coffee and regret. I was grading vocabulary quizzes on the couch when my phone chimed with an email notification. My heart leapt to my throat. "Emma, my office, tomorrow, 2 p.m., Elizabeth Green." New Dear Emma, no pleasantries, no acknowledgement of the disaster at the restaurant. Just a command, not a request, in classic mother form. I should have been angry at her presumption that I could drop everything to meet on her schedule. I had classes until 3:15. But instead, I found myself typing, "I'll be there." Then I called the school to arrange for a substitute teacher for my afternoon classes. The next day dawned clear and cold, the kind of crisp autumn day that normally lifted my spirits. I spent an absurd amount of time deciding what to wear, finally settling on a simple gray dress and cardigan that walked the line between professional and casual. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard, but I also didn't want to give her any ammunition about my shabby teacher wardrobe. The offices of Wilson and Green occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek building in the financial district. I'd practically grown up there, doing homework in empty conference rooms after school, watching mother command armies of associates and paralegals. It had been my expected future once, before I'd veered off the prescribed path. The receptionist, a young man I didn't recognize, looked up as I entered. "Welcome to Wilson and Green. How may I help you?" "I'm here to see Elizabeth Green," I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. "Emma Wilson. I'm her daughter." His eyes widened slightly. I was used to that reaction. Everyone who knew mother was surprised to learn she had a daughter, partly because she rarely mentioned me, and partly because we looked nothing alike. She was all cool elegance and sharp angles. I had my father's softer features and unruly brown hair. "Of course, Ms. Wilson. Ms. Green is expecting you. 40th floor, corner office." As if I could have forgotten, I thanked him and headed for the elevator, my stomach clenching with each ascending floor. The doors opened onto a reception area I knew well, all glass and steel and tasteful abstract art. Marian, mother's longtime assistant, sat at her desk outside the corner office, typing furiously. She looked up as I approached, her stern face softening into something like sympathy. "Emma," she said, standing to greet me. "It's been too long." "Hello, Marian," I replied, accepting her brief hug. "Is she in?" "She is. She's asked not to be disturbed during your meeting." Marian gave my arm a gentle squeeze. "It's good to see you, dear. You look well." "Thank you," I said, touched by her kindness. Marian had always slipped me candy when I was younger, had always asked about my day when mother was too busy. "Go on in," she said, nodding toward the imposing double doors. I took a deep breath and knocked. "Enter," came mother's crisp voice. I pushed open the door to find her standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, her back to me, looking out over the Boston skyline. The office was exactly as I remembered, minimalist, intimidating, a testament to power carefully cultivated over decades. "Close the door," she said without turning around. I did as instructed, then stood awkwardly just inside, unsure whether to sit or remain standing. After a moment, she turned to face me. She wore a charcoal gray suit today, her silver hair pulled back severely, emphasizing her high cheekbones and stern mouth, no trace of the wine stain from the restaurant disaster. "You're early," she said, glancing at her watch. "That's new." "I didn't want to be late," I replied, hating how defensive I already sounded. She gestured to one of the chairs across from her desk. "Sit." I sat, placing my purse on the floor beside me. Mother remained standing for a moment longer, maintaining the power dynamic she'd established before finally taking her seat behind the massive desk. "You wanted to talk," she said, folding her hands in front of her. "So talk?" Typical mother, putting the burden of conversation on me after she'd been the one to issue the command to meet. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words I'd rehearsed on the train ride over. "The waiter," I began, then stopped, starting again. "At the restaurant, he told me something after I left." One perfectly arched eyebrow lifted. "Did he?" "He said you paid for everything in advance, that you ordered for me before I even arrived." I searched her face for any reaction. "Why would you do that?" "Perhaps I anticipated your stubborn insistence on ordering the cheapest item on the menu, despite the fact that I was clearly paying," she replied smoothly. "It seemed more efficient to order in advance." "But you didn't tell me you were paying," I countered. "You let me believe I would be responsible for my portion. You watched me panic about the prices. I assumed it was obvious I would be covering the bill, as I was the one who extended the invitation." She leaned back slightly in her chair. "If you chose to make assumptions to the contrary, that's hardly my fault." I felt my frustration rising. This was so typical her, twisting things to make me seem unreasonable, to make herself the rationale one. "If it was so obvious, why did you tell the waiter not to let me know you'd already paid?" A flicker of some discomfort crossed her face before disappearing behind her professional mask. "I didn't think it was necessary information at the time." "You never do anything without a reason." "Mother," I said, leaning forward. "What was the real reason?" She sighed, a small, controlled exhalation that somehow conveyed a world of impatience. "Is this really why you wanted to meet, to interrogate me about a dinner bill?" "No." I took a deep breath. "I wanted to meet because for 3 years I've been telling myself a story about you, about us, about why our relationship fractured. And now I'm wondering if that story is incomplete. Something shifted in her expression, something I couldn't quite read. She picked up a pen from a desk, turning it over in her fingers in a rare display of what might have been nervousness. "What story have you been telling yourself?" she asked finally, her voice uncharacteristically quiet. "That you disowned me because I disappointed you. Because I chose teaching over law. That you couldn't love a daughter who didn't fulfill your expectations." The words came out in a rush, painful truths I'd carried for years. Mother set down the pen with deliberate care. "Is that what you think happened? Isn't it?" I challenged. "You cut me off financially. You stopped calling, stopped visiting. When Dad died last year, you had your assistant email me about the funeral arrangements. Your father," she said, a edge creeping into her voice, "left us both long before he died, Emma. Or have you conveniently forgotten that part? This isn't about Dad," I insisted. "This is about you and me, about how you shut me out because I wouldn't be the daughter you wanted." Mother stood abruptly, walking back to the window. For a long moment, she said nothing, just stared out at the city below. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, stripped of its usual sharp authority. "You think I shut you out because you disappointed me?" she said, still facing the window. "That's not what happened, Emma." "Then what did happen?" I asked, my heart pounding. She turned to face me, and for the first time, I noticed the fine lines around her eyes, the slight droop to her shoulders that hadn't been there 3 years ago. "You shut me out. You decided I was the villain in your story, and you cut me off." I stared at her, speechless. "That's not the night you told me you were changing your major," she continued. "You said, and I quote, 'I'm done trying to live up to your impossible standards. I'm done being your disappointment. From now on, I'm living my life for me, not for you.' Then you walked out of my house and didn't return my calls for weeks." I remembered that night, the screaming match that had ended with me storming out, shaking with rage and hurt, but I also remembered what had come after. "I reached out at graduation. You didn't come. I wasn't invited," she said simply. "That's not true. I sent you an invitation." "No, Emma. You did. Done." She walked to a filing cabinet in the corner of her office, unlocked a drawer, and pulled out a folder. From it, she extracted a small, cream-colored card, my graduation announcement. She handed it to me. I stared at it in confusion. It was addressed in my handwriting to Elizabeth Green, Wilson, and Greenlaw offices. But there was no invitation enclosed, just the announcement of the ceremony. I thought I included the actual invitation," I said, my certainty wavering. "With the tickets." "You didn't." She returned to her desk. "I received this announcement 2 weeks before your graduation. No tickets. No invitation. Just notification of an event, as if I were a distant acquaintance to be informed, rather than a mother to be included." I tried to remember addressing the announcements. I'd done dozens in a rush, exhausted from finals and student teaching. Had I really forgotten to include Mother's invitation? Or had I, in some passive-aggressive corner of my subconscious, deliberately excluded her while telling myself I hadn't? "I would have come anyway," she continued, "but when I called to ask about arrangements, you didn't answer. I left a message. You never called back." I remembered the missed call, remembered seeing her name on my phone and letting it go to voicemail. Telling myself I'd call her back when I wasn't so busy, when I felt stronger, when I had the energy to deal with her inevitable criticism. I never did. "After that," she said, "you moved to Boston without telling me. I had to hear from Marion's daughter, who saw your Facebook post, that you'd accepted a teaching position across the country. I thought you didn't want anything to do with me," I said weakly. "Based on what evidence?" she asked, her lawyer's precision cutting through my assumptions. "Did I ever say I wanted you out of my life? Did I ever tell you I was disappointed in your career choice? You didn't have to say it. It was obvious from how you reacted." "How I reacted," she interrupted, "was to ask questions. Practical questions about salary, benefits, job security. Things any parent might ask when their child chooses a notoriously underpaid profession. You interpreted those questions as criticism. Because they were criticism, I insisted. The tone, the implications, the tone you heard," she corrected. "The implications you inferred." I stood up, suddenly needing to move. This is classic. You're gaslighting me, making me doubt my own memories. I'm offering a different perspective on shared events, she said evenly. You're free to reject it. I paced to the bookshelves lining one wall of her office, needing a moment to collect my thoughts. This wasn't going at all how I'd expected. I'd come prepared for her icy dismissal or for another argument, not for this alternate version of our history that made me the villain. Not her. If that's true, I said finally, turning back to face her, then why did you cut me off financially? Why did you cancel my credit card, stop paying my rent? A flicker of genuine surprise crossed her face. Is that what you think happened? It's what did happen, I insisted. 3 months after I moved to Boston, all the support stopped. No warning, no explanation. Mother opened her desk drawer and pulled out another folder, this one thicker. I think you should see this. She laid out a series of documents on the desk. Bank statements, canceled checks, emails. 3 months after you moved to Boston, she said, pointing to the first statement. The rent checks I was sending to your landlord started being returned. When I called the apartment complex, they informed me you had moved out with no forwarding address. The credit card was reported lost, and when the company contacted you to verify a replacement, you told them you no longer needed it. She laid out another document. This is the email I sent you asking for your new address so I could continue the support we had agreed upon. You never responded. I stared at the evidence. Memories the apartment with the black mold I'd had to leave suddenly, the roommate situation that had fallen through, the weeks of couch surfing while I looked for a place I could afford on my starting teacher's salary, the pride that had kept me from asking Mother for help because I'd been so determined to prove I could make it on my own. And yes, the email I'd seen and ignored because I'd assumed it was another attempt to lure me back to her vision for my life. I thought, I began, then stopped. What had I thought? That she'd deliberately cut me off to punish me. That she'd abandoned me because I hadn't become the daughter she wanted. Yes, that was exactly what I'd thought. What I'd told myself for 3 years. What I'd built my entire narrative of victimhood around. You thought the worst of me, she finished quietly. As you always have. The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I had always assumed the worst about her motives, had always interpreted her actions through the lens of criticism rather than concern. I sank back into the chair, suddenly exhausted. Why did you invite me to dinner the other night? After 3 years of silence, Mother hesitated, something vulnerable crossing her face before she masked it. I'm retiring at the end of the year. I've been, reevaluating certain choices, certain relationships. So this was what? An attempt at reconciliation. Perhaps, she admitted, though clearly not a successful one. I thought back to the disaster at Marcello's, her criticisms, my defensiveness, the familiar pattern we'd fallen into. You have a funny way of showing it. You spent the entire dinner criticizing me. Did she asked, or did I ask questions that you interpreted as criticism because that's what you expected from me? I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it, thinking back. Had she actually criticized my teaching career, or had she asked about it in her typically blunt way? Had I gone in expecting an attack and therefore heard one in every question? Why didn't you tell me you'd already paid for dinner? I asked again, circling back to the detail that had started all of this. Mother sighed. Because I knew if I made a point of paying, you would order the least expensive item on the menu out of some misguided pride or independence. I wanted you to order what you actually wanted, not what you thought you could afford. So you manipulated the situation, I said, but without the accusation I might have injected 3 days ago. I attempted to circumvent a pattern I anticipated, she corrected, based on 30 years of experience with my daughter. The words hung between us, neither accusation nor excuse, just a simple statement of fact. We had fallen into patterns, she and I, roles we played so automatically we barely noticed them anymore. She, the demanding mother with impossible standards. Me, the rebellious daughter, determined to prove her wrong. But what if those weren't our only possible roles? I studied her face, the face I'd both loved and resented for as long as I could remember. For the first time in years, I tried to see beyond my own narrative of her, beyond the cold, critical mother who had never been satisfied. What if there was more to her story than I had allowed myself to see? Why did you become a lawyer? I asked suddenly. She blinked, clearly surprised by the change in subject. You know why? Your grandfather expected it, I finished. Just like you expected me to follow in your footsteps. Something shifted in her expression. It wasn't quite the same situation. Wasn't it? No. She straightened a pen on her desk. Your grandfather didn't expect. He demanded. There was no choice involved. I leaned forward. And you gave me a choice. I thought I did. A small, sad smile touched her lips. Clearly, I was less successful at that than I believed. The admission, so unlike her usual certainty, caught me off guard. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the weight of decades of misunderstanding filling the space between us. Finally, Mother broke the silence. The retirement gala is next month. I'd still like you to be there. As the prodigal daughter returned to the fold, I asked, but without the bitterness that would have colored the question 3 days ago. As my daughter, she said simply, the only family I have left. I swallowed hard against the unexpected lump in my throat. I'll think about it. She nodded, accepting this non-committal answer with unusual grace. That's all I can ask. As I stood to leave, I hesitated, then asked the question that had been haunting me since the restaurant. Do you really not recognize me anymore? The person I've become. Mother looked at me for a long moment, really looked at me, in a way that made me feel truly seen for perhaps the first time in my adult life. I recognize parts, she said finally. Your determination, your principles, your refusal to take the easy path. She paused. But no, I don't fully recognize the woman you've become, and that's my failure, not yours. It wasn't an apology. Elizabeth Green didn't apologize, but it was perhaps the closest thing to one I'd ever received from her. Maybe, I said carefully, we could work on changing that, getting to know each other again as the people we actually are, not the roles we've been playing. I'd like that, she said, and for once, I believed her. As I turned to leave, she called after me. Emma? I paused at the door. Yes, your father would have been proud of you. The teacher you've become. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the cost of this admission. He always said you had his heart, not mine. I think he was right about that. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and closed the door behind me. Outside her office, I took a deep breath, feeling as if something fundamental had shifted, not fixed, not healed, but shifted enough to allow the possibility of a different future than the one I'd resigned myself to. Marian looked up as I passed her desk. Everything all right, Emma? I'm not sure, I answered honestly, but I think it might be, eventually. She smiled. Your mother has been different since she decided to retire. Reflective, even nostalgic, though she'd die before admitting it. I thought about that as I rode the elevator down to the lobby. Mother? Nostalgic? Mother? Capable of change. Mother? As a complete person with her own history and regrets, not just the two-dimensional villain in my story. It was a lot to process. As I stepped out onto the street, my phone buzzed with a text. Expecting Zoe checking in, I was surprised to see an unknown number. This is Daniel from Marcello's. Hope this isn't weird, but I wanted to make sure you were okay after the other night. My sister said I should mind my own business, but I keep thinking about what happened. Anyway, just checking in. I stared at the text, oddly touched by this stranger's concern. After a moment's hesitation, I typed back. Thank you for checking in, and for telling me the truth that night. It's complicated, but I think it might have changed things for the better. How did you get my number? His response came quickly. Your mom left her card when she made the reservation. Your number was written on the back. Is that creepy? That feels creepy now that I've typed it out. I smiled despite myself. A little creepy, but I'll give it a pass. Another buzz. Phew. So, not to be even more inappropriate, but would you maybe want to get coffee sometime? To talk about complicated mothers. I have extensive experience in that department. I hesitated. Dating hadn't been on my radar for months, maybe longer. Between teaching and grading and my constant low-level anxiety about money, I hadn't made time for it, but something about Daniel's kind eyes and direct manner had stayed with me. Coffee sounds nice, But let's be clear, you're asking me out, right? Not just for a therapy session about our mothers. His reply made me laugh out loud on the crowded sidewalk. Definitely asking you out. So I'm open to mutual mother trauma discussion as well. Win-win? I typed back. Saturday, 11 a.m., Thinkin' Cup on Newbury. It's a date. I'll be the one not wearing a waiter's uniform. As I walked to the tea station, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because one conversation with mother had magically fixed everything. It hadn't. There were still years of hurt and misunderstanding to work through, patterns to unlearn, trust to rebuild. But for the first time, I could see the possibility of a different relationship with her. Not the one I'd always wanted. She would never be the warm, demonstrative mother of my childhood fantasies. But perhaps we could build something new, something based on who we actually were rather than who we'd expected each other to be. And maybe, just maybe, I could learn to see beyond the roles we'd both been playing for so long. To recognize that she, like me, was more complex than the caricature I'd created in my mind. She had paid for everything, after all. Perhaps that was a metaphor worth examining. The thinking cup was crowded when I arrived on Saturday. The sweet aroma of fresh-baked pastries and rich coffee filling the air. I spotted Daniel immediately, seated at a small table near the window, a nervous smile lighting up his face as our eyes met. He wore dark jeans and a blue button-down that brought out the warmth in his eyes that had shown me kindness on one of the most humiliating nights of my life. "You came," he said, standing as I approached. "Did you think I wouldn't?" I asked, unwinding my scarf. "Honestly, I have expected to be He pulled out my chair. "I did track you down in a pretty stalkerish way." I laughed, settling into the seat. "Well, I'm a teacher. We're trained to give second chances." "Lucky for me," he said, his smile reaching his eyes in a way that made my stomach flutter. "I ordered you a latte, but I can get you something else if that's not your thing." "A latte's perfect, actually." I wrapped my cold hands around the warm mug. "So, not to dive right into the heavy stuff, but I met with my mother after, the restaurant disaster." Daniel's eyebrows rose. "That was fast. How did it go?" I took a sip of my latte, gathering my thoughts. Surprising, confusing, enlightening. "I'm still processing, to be honest." "I get that," he said. "Family stuff is never straightforward, is it?" "Definitely not." I steadied him over the rim of my mug. "You mentioned your sister had a similar relationship with your mom." A shadow crossed his face. "Yeah, my mom. She had expectations, very specific ones. My sister never quite measured up in her eyes, or that's how it felt to Mia. They fought constantly." He traced the rim of his coffee cup with his finger, but when Mom got sick, it was Mia who moved back home to take care of her. Not me. That must have been difficult for both of them. It was. But something changed during those months. They found a way to see each other differently. His eyes met mine. "That's why I told you about your mom paying for dinner. I saw how she looked at you when you weren't watching. There was something there that reminded me of my mom with Mia. Something complicated. Love and fear and disappointment and pride all mixed up together. I considered this. Your mom and sister they close now." Daniel's smile turned sad. "My mom passed away last year. But yes, by the end, they had found a kind of peace. Not perfect, but real." "I'm sorry about your mom," I said softly. He nodded his thanks. "Enough about my family tragedy. Tell me about you." Teaching sixth grade English, that must be both rewarding and terrifying. The conversation shifted to lighter ground, my adventures in middle school education. His journey from art school dropout to restaurant manager. He was easy to talk to, quick to laugh, attentive in a way that made me feel genuinely interesting. 2 hours passed in what felt like minutes. "I should probably get going," I said reluctantly, noticing the time. "I have papers to grade, the glamorous life of a teacher," he teased. "Can I walk you to the tea?" Outside, the October air was crisp, leaves crunching beneath our feet as we strolled toward the station. Our hands brushed once, twice, before his fingers tentatively intertwined with mine. I didn't pull away. "I'd like to see you again," he said as we reached the station entrance. "If you want, I'd like that too," I admitted, though fair warning, my life is pretty boring. Lots of grading, early bedtimes, occasional existential crises about whether I'm making a difference. Sounds perfect, he said, his thumb brushing over my knuckles. I like boring. Boring is underrated. He leaned in slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted. I didn't. His lips were warm against mine, the kiss gentle and brief, but full of promise. I'll call you, he said. You better? I replied, surprising myself with the flirtation. On the train ride home, I found myself smiling at nothing in particular, earning curious glances from other passengers. It had been a long time since I'd felt this kind of uncomplicated happiness, this sense that something good might be beginning. When I arrived home, Zoe was sprawled on the couch and a bowl of popcorn balanced on her stomach, Netflix playing on our ancient TV. Well, she said, pausing the show as I hung up my coat. Look who's glowing after her coffee date. Spill everything immediately. I flopped down beside her, stealing a handful of popcorn. It was nice. He's nice. We're going to see each other again. Details, Wilson. I need details. She poked me with her foot. Is he a good kisser? He looks like he'd be a good kisser. How would you know what he looks like? I laughed. She wiggled her eyebrows. I may have stalked Marcello's Instagram to find your knight in shining waiter's uniform. You're ridiculous, I told her, but then added, and yes, he's a good kisser. She pumped her fist triumphantly. I knew it. This is the rom-com moment I've been waiting for. Teacher meets waiter in dramatic restaurant showdown with evil mother. The mention of mother sobered me slightly. Speaking of, I need to decide whether to go to her retirement gala. Zoe sat up, suddenly serious. Are you actually considering it? After everything, I sighed, sinking deeper into the couch cushions. I don't know. Our conversation in her office was different. For the first time, I felt like we were actually talking to each other, not just playing our usual roles. And you believe her? About not cutting you off on purpose. I saw the evidence. I said, the returned checks, the emails I never answered. And it fits with how I was back then, so determined to make it on my own that I cut off my nose to spite my face. Zoe considered this. People don't change overnight, especially not someone like your mother. I know that, I assured her. I'm not expecting some magical transformation where she suddenly becomes Mother of the Year. But maybe there's room for something different between us. Something better than 3 more years of silence. And the gala. That's in, what, 2 weeks? 3, I corrected, and I haven't decided yet. It would mean seeing all her colleagues, all those lawyers who expected me to follow in her footsteps, explaining for the 100th time why I chose teaching instead. Plus finding something to wear that won't earn you the Elizabeth Green glare of disapproval. Zoe, I groaned, covering my face with a throw pillow. I didn't even think about that part. I have nothing appropriate for a high-end law firm gala. We'll figure it out, Zoe promised, patting my leg. But right now, I need more details about Waiterboy. Does he have any cute friends for your tragically single roommate? The next 2 weeks passed in a pleasant blur. School kept me busy, parent-teacher conferences, a field trip to the Museum of Fine Arts, the daily challenge of keeping 32 sixth graders engaged with the wonders of literature and grammar. Daniel and I went on 3 more a movie, a walk along the Charles River, dinner at his apartment where he impressed me with homemade pasta that put Marcello's to shame. It was easy being with him. Comfortable in a way relationships rarely were for me. He listened when I talked about my students, asked thoughtful questions, never made me feel like my career was something to apologize for. My sister would have loved you, he told me on our 4th date, as we shared dessert at a tiny bakery near his apartment. She was always saying teachers were the unsung heroes. Was she a teacher, too? I asked. He shook his head. Social worker, another criminally underpaid profession dedicated to helping others. She sounds amazing, I said. She was? He replied, then caught himself. She is. She moved to Seattle after Mom died. We don't talk as much as we should. I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. You should call her, he smiled ruefully. I know. Family's complicated, right? The most complicated, I agreed. Speaking of complicated family, I still hadn't responded to Mother's invitation to the gala. With 1 week to go, I finally made my decision. I would go, not to please her, not out of obligation, but because it felt like a step I needed to take if we were going to try building this new, undefined relationship. I called her office, half hoping to get her voicemail, but she answered on the second ring. Elizabeth Green. Mother, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. It's Emma Apausi. Emma. How are you? I'm well, I replied, the formality of our conversation almost comical after the emotional confrontation in her office. I'm calling about the retirement gala. I'd like to attend if the invitation is still open. Another pause. Longer this time. Of course it is, she said finally. I'll have Marion send you the details. Thank you. I hesitated, then added, I'm looking forward to it. As am I, she replied, and I thought I detected a note of genuine pleasure in her voice. After we hung up, I stared at my phone for a long moment, wondering if I'd made the right decision. Then I texted Zoe, Operation Find Something to Wear 2 Mother's Gala is officially on. Help. Her response was immediate. Emergency shopping trip this weekend. I'll bring reinforcements. The reinforcements turned out to be May, a surgical resident Zoe knew from the hospital, who apparently had impeccable taste and a secret addiction to designer sample sales. Between the 3 of us, we found a midnight blue dress that was both elegant enough for Mother's standards and within my budget thanks to an end-of-season sale. You look amazing, Zoe declared as I tried it on in the store. Sophisticated but not stuffy. Perfect for facing the dragon lady and her minions. Don't call her that, I said automatically, then caught myself, surprised by my own defensive mother. Zoe raised an eyebrow but didn't comment. The night of the gala arrived with a mix of unseasonably warm weather and my own mounting anxiety. Daniel had offered to be my +1, but I declined, not quite ready to introduce him to that world door to Mother Jez yet. This evening was about taking 1 step, not 10. You've got this, Zoe assured me as I stood in our tiny hallway, checking my reflection one last time. Remember, you're a successful professional in your own right. Hold your head high, right? I said, smoothing down the front of my dress. Successful, professional. Head high. Don't spill wine on anyone. That's the spirit, she laughed, giving me a gentle push toward the door. Text me updates. I'll keep my phone on, vibrate during my shift. The gala was being held at the Four Seasons in a ballroom with sweeping views of the public garden. As my Uber pulled up to the entrance, I took a deep breath, channeling some of Mother's trademark composure. Inside, the ballroom was transformed into an elegant wonderland of soft lighting, white flowers, and tasteful jazz from a live quartet in the corner. I recognized many faces from my childhood partners, associates, clients who'd been coming to the firm's events for decades. Some nodded in recognition as I passed. Others looked puzzled, as if trying to place me. I scanned the room for Mother, finally spotting her near the center, surrounded by a small group of what appeared to be the firm's senior partners. She wore a silver gown that matched her hair perfectly, looking every inch the legal titan being celebrated tonight. As if sensing my presence, she looped up her eyes, finding mine across the crowded room. For a moment, we simply regarded each other. Then, she excused herself from her group and made her way toward me. Emma, she said when she reached me, her voice warm but controlled. You came. I said I would, I replied, suddenly uncertain about the protocol here. Did we hug? Shake hands? Neither seemed quite right. Mother solved the dilemma by lightly touching my arm, not quite an embrace, but more affectionate than her usual greeting. You look lovely, she said, her eyes taking in my dress with what seemed like genuine approval. That color suits you. Thank you, I said, feeling oddly shy. You look beautiful as well. An awkward silence fell between us, 30 years of complicated history making small talk nearly impossible. Would you like something to drink? She finally asked. The champagne is excellent. That would be nice, I agreed. She signaled to a passing waiter, who brought 2 flutes of champagne. As we stood sipping our drinks, a tall man with salt and pepper hair approached, his face lighting up at the sight of Mother. Elizabeth, he said warmly, kissing her cheek in a familiar way that surprised me. There you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. His eyes shifted to me, curious. James, Mother said, something softening in her expression. I'd like you to meet my daughter, Emma. Emma, This is James Carter, our newest senior partner. It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Emma, James said, extending his hand. Your mother speaks of you often. I nearly choked on my champagne. Mother, speaking of me. Often, to this man I'd never met. All good things, I hope, I managed, shaking his hand. Nothing but, he assured me with a smile that reached his eyes. I understand you're a teacher. Middle school English, is it? That must be incredibly rewarding. I blinked in surprise, both at his knowledge of my career and at the genuine interest in his voice. It is, I confirmed. Challenging, but rewarding. James's daughter is considering a career in education, Mother explained, with none of the dismissive tone I would have expected. Special education, specifically. That's wonderful, I said sincerely. It's a demanding field, but so important. That's what I keep telling her, James agreed. Though her grandfather is pushing for law school, of course, he gave Mother a meaningful look that I couldn't quite interpret. Families and their expectations, I said diplomatically. Always complicated. Mother's eyes met mine, a flash of understanding passing between us. Indeed they are, she murmured. The evening progressed with a series of similar introductions, each one subtly shifting my understanding of Mother's life these past 3 years. Colleagues who mentioned projects she'd delegated after that school supply drive your class was doing needed her attention. A junior associate who thanked me for the literacy program resources I'd apparently sent over at Mother's request. It was as if I'd stumbled into an alternate universe where Mother not only acknowledged my existence but spoke of me with something approaching pride. During a lull in the socializing, I found myself alone with her near the windows overlooking the garden. Night had fallen, the trees below, twinkling with decorative lights. You've been talking about me, I said, not accusingly, just stating a fact that still seemed improbable. To your colleagues. Mother sipped her champagne, her gaze on the view rather than me. You are my daughter, she said simply. Why wouldn't I mention you? Because I disappointed you, I said. The words slipping out before I could stop them. Because I didn't become what you wanted. She turned to face me then, her expression uncharacteristically open. Is that still what you believe? After our conversation in my office, I considered the question honestly. I don't know what to believe anymore. For so long, I've had this narrative about us, about you. It's hard to let go of, even with evidence to the contrary. I understand that better than you might think, she said quietly. I've had my own narratives to confront. Before I could ask what she meant, the firm's managing partner clinked a glass, calling for attention. The formal portion of the evening was beginnings, speeches, toasts, the ceremonial passing of leadership. Mother was called to the podium to give her retirement speech. I watched as she moved through the crowd with the poise and authority that had defined her career, wondering what she'd say, what carefully curated version of her professional life she would present. For 40 years, she began whence the applause died down, Wilson & Green has been my home. Many of you have heard me say that the law is my first love, my true calling. She paused, her eyes finding mine in the crowd. But that isn't entirely accurate. A murmur rippled through the audience, surprise at this deviation from Elizabeth Green's typically polished rhetoric. Before the law, there was family, she continued. My father, whose footsteps I followed into this profession, my late husband, whose brilliance and compassion shaped so much of my approach to the practice of law. Another pause, longer this time. And my daughter, Emma, who is here tonight. Heat rushed to my face as heads turned to look at me. Mother had never been one for public sentiment or family references in her professional life. Emma chose a different path than the one I envisioned for her, Mother said, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of emotion I'd rarely heard. She became a teacher. For years, I saw this as a rejection of the legacy I'd hoped to build. I was wrong. The room was completely silent now. Everyone as shocked as I was by this uncharacteristic personal revelation. In her classroom, my daughter does what the best lawyers do. She advocates. She fights for those who need a voice. She builds foundations that will support futures I cannot even imagine. Mother's eyes held mine, unflinching. It took me far too long to recognize that she hadn't rejected my legacy. She had transformed it into something perhaps more enduring than anything I've built in these hallowed halls. Tears pricked at my eyes, unexpected and unwelcome in this public setting. I blinked them back furiously. As I leave Wilson and Green in the capable hands of the next generation, Mother continued, returning to her prepared remarks, I carry with me the lessons of 4 decades of legal practice, but also the lesson my daughter taught me, that legacy isn't about replication. It's about evolution. The rest of her speech was the expected reflection on cases won, precedents set, the future of the firm. But those few sentences about me about Assad shifted something fundamental between us, a public acknowledgement of a private reckoning that we'd only just begun. After the speeches concluded and the formal dinner began, I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment alone to process what had just happened. In the elegant marble sanctuary, I stared at my reflection, seeing echoes of her in my cheekbones, in the set of my jaw, in the way I held myself, even now straight-backed, composed, despite the emotional earthquake I'd just experienced. The door opened, and Mother entered, our eyes meeting in the mirror. Your speech, I began, my voice unsteady. What you said about me was true, she finished, moving to stand beside me at the sinks. Perhaps the most honest thing I've said from that podium in 40 years. Why now? I asked. After all this time, she considered her answer carefully, smoothing an already perfect strand of hair. Retirement has a way of clarifying priorities, of stripping away the professional armor we construct. And I'm a priority. I couldn't keep the note of disbelief from my voice. You have always been my priority, Emma, she said quietly, even when I expressed it poorly. Even when you couldn't see it. Even when I couldn't see it myself. I turned to face her directly, searching her eyes for the truth. I don't know if I can believe that yet. I understand, she said, and I thought I saw a flicker of pain cross her face. Trust is earned, not granted. I haven't earned yours, but you want to, I realized aloud. That's what all this is about. The dinner invitation. Tonight, you're trying to... what? Make a man this? I'm trying to know my daughter, she said simply. Before it's too late, the raw honesty in her voice caught me off guard. Elizabeth Green didn't do vulnerability, didn't admit to regrets or mistakes. Yet here she was, stripped of her usual defenses, offering something I'd never thought possible, a genuine desire for connection. I'd like that too, I admitted, the words feeling like both surrender and victory. To know you, the real you, not just Mother. A small, tentative smile touched her lips. Elizabeth, she said. My friends call me Elizabeth. Elizabeth, I repeated, testing the unfamiliar shape of her name in my mouth. Not Mother, with all its loaded expectations and history, but Elizabeth, a woman with her own story, her own regrets, her own hope for redemption. We rejoined the gala side by side, not quite comfortable, but no longer adversaries. As we approached our table, I felt my phone vibrate in my clutch. A text from Daniel. Hope the dragon's den isn't too terrifying. Thinking of you. Rescue ice cream waiting at my place after if needed. I smiled, typing back quickly. Dragons apparently can change their scales. Still processing. We'll call you later. As I slipped my phone away, I caught Mother Elizabeth watching me with curious eyes. Someone special? She asked, her tone carefully neutral. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. Possibly. It's new. She nodded, accepting this limited information without pushing for more. Another small change the Elizabeth Green I'd grown up with would have demanded details, credentials, a 5-year plan. I look forward to hearing about him, she said simply. When you're ready. As the evening drew to a close, guests began to drift away, offering final congratulations to the woman of the hour. Elizabeth turned to me as the crowd thinned. Thank you for coming, she said, formal yet sincere. It meant a great deal to me. Thank you for inviting me, I replied, and for what you said in your speech. She nodded, acknowledging both the words and the deeper current beneath them. Then, hesitantly, she reached out and squeezed my hand, not quite the hug that might have felt natural between another mother and daughter, but a genuine gesture of affection nonetheless. Perhaps we could have lunch next week, she suggested. Something less formal than Marcello's, no pre-ordered meals or wine mishaps. I smiled, recognizing the olive branch. I'd like that. As I left the hotel, the night air cooled against my skin. I felt lighter somehow. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't. Not by a long shot. There were still years of hurt to work through, patterns to unlearn, trust to rebuild. But for the first time, I could imagine a future where Elizabeth and I might know each other as we truly were, not the roles we'd been playing for 3 decades, but the complex, flawed, real people beneath those roles. She had paid for everything at Marcello's, and tonight, in her own way, she had paid an offering, not money this time, but vulnerability, acknowledgement, the first tentative steps toward a different kind of relationship. It wasn't everything, but it was a beginning. And for now, that was enough. 6 months after the gala, on a perfect spring evening in April, I stood outside Marcello's once again, my heart beating a nervous rhythm against my ribs. This time, I wasn't alone. Daniel stood beside me, his hand warm and steady in mine. "Remind me again why we thought this was a good idea?" I asked, only half joking as I stared at the restaurant's familiar facade. "Because symbolic gestures are important in the healing process," he replied, squeezing my hand. "Also, their tiramisu is exceptional." I laughed, some of the tension leaving my shoulders. "True on both counts." "She's already inside," Daniel said, checking his watch. "Ready?" I took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be," the hostess different from the one 6 months ago greeted us, with a warm smile. "Reservation name?" "Green," Daniel replied. "We're joining Ms. Green, AAV course. Right this way." She led us through the restaurant to a table near the windows, not the same table as before, I noted with relief. Elizabeth sat waiting, elegant as always in a burgundy blouse and pearls, her silver hair shorter now in a stylish bob that softened her features. She stood as we approached. "Emma," she said, then, with a nod to my companion, "Daniel." "Elizabeth," I replied, the name still feeling strange on my tongue after 29 years of mother. We had been meeting regularly for lunch over the past 6 months, sometimes just the two of us, sometimes with Daniel joining us. Each meeting was a careful dance of getting to know each other, of building something new from the ashes of our old relationship. There had been awkward moments, tense silences, occasional retreats to old patterns, but also laughter, surprising discoveries, and a growing sense of genuine connection. Elizabeth had retired fully now, trading her corner office for volunteer work at a legal aid clinic and, surprisingly, a beginner's watercolor class she'd admitted to joining on a whim. I'd introduced her to Daniel officially 3 months ago, watching with amazement as she asked thoughtful questions about his career goals and family without a single veiled criticism. Tonight was different, though. Tonight we were back where it had all begun, or rather, where it had begun again. Back to Marcello's, the scene of our most spectacular public meltdown and the unexpected turning point in our relationship. "You're looking well," Elizabeth said as we settled into our seats. "Both of you." "Thanks," Daniel replied, easily. "The new management position is keeping me busy, but in a good way." "And you've been to Seattle recently?" she asked, surprising me with her recall of the details Daniel had shared about his sister during our last lunch. "Last month," he confirmed. "Mia and I had a great visit. She's thinking of moving back east." "Actually, that would be wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased for him. Over the past 6 months, inspired in part by my reconciliation with Elizabeth, Daniel had been rebuilding his relationship with his sister, healing the distance that had grown between them after their mother's death. The waiter approached, not Daniel this time, of course, but a young woman with a bright smile. "Good evening. Can I start you with some drinks?" "A bottle of the Barolo, please," Elizabeth said, then glanced at me. "Unless you'd prefer something else?" The question, her deference to my preference rather than simply ordering for the table, was a small thing, but it represented miles of progress from where we'd been. "The Barolo sounds perfect," I assured her. The waiter nodded and left to retrieve our wine. I took the liberty of making a reservation, "but I thought we should all order for ourselves tonight," Elizabeth said, a hint of self-deprecating humor in her voice, given how well my pre-ordering worked last time. I smiled, appreciating her acknowledgement of that disastrous evening. Probably wise. As we studied our menus, I marveled at how different this felt, the three of us sitting together comfortably, no undercurrents of tension, no walking on eggshells, just a family dinner. The thought caught me off guard. Family. Was that what we were becoming? How are your students handling the end-of-year testing? Elizabeth asked, setting her menu aside. About as well as can be expected, I replied. Stressed, but prepared. We've been working on mindfulness techniques to help with test anxiety. Mindfulness, Elizabeth repeated, nodding. Your father would have approved. He was always telling me I needed to be present instead of constantly planning 3 steps ahead. These casual mentions of my father were a new part of Elizabeth's efforts to share more of our family history, to fill in the gaps of the stories I'd never heard or had forgotten. After he left when I was 12, she had rarely spoken his name, as if erasing him from our narrative could erase the pain of his abandonment. Was he into meditation? Daniel asked, genuinely curious. Elizabeth laughed a real laugh. Not the polite social chuckle I'd grown up hearing. Mark couldn't sit still for 5 minutes. But he was naturally present in a way I never mastered. He could spend an entire afternoon with Emma building a blanket fort without once checking his watch or thinking about what needed to be done next. I blinked, surprised by this casual revelation of a side of my father I barely remembered. I don't recall the blanket forts. You were very young, Elizabeth said, a shadow of old sadness crossing her face before she pushed it away. 4, maybe 5. He would turn the entire living room into an elaborate castle. Drove the housekeeper mad. The waiter returned with our wine, pouring tastes for each of us before filling our glasses. We ordered scallops for Elizabeth, salmon for me, and the filet mignon for Daniel. To new beginnings, Elizabeth said, raising her glass in a toast, and to remembering the good parts of the past, not just the painful ones. We clinked glasses, the rich red wine catching the light. I studied Elizabeth's face over the rim of my glass, seeing beyond the familiar features to the woman beneath, a woman who, at 6, was finally allowing herself to soften, to reflect, to connect in ways she'd held herself back from 4 decades. I have something for you, she said after we'd set our glasses down. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, flat package wrapped in simple, silver paper, a belated birthday gift. My birthday had been last week. She'd called that morning and taken me to lunch, presenting me with a beautiful leather messenger bag to replace my worn-out teacher's tote. I'd assumed that was my gift. You already gave me the bag, I said, confused but touched. That was practical, she replied, sliding the package across the table. This is ... personal. Curious? I carefully unwrapped the silver paper. Inside was a flat, hinged box. I opened it to find a photograph I'd never seen before, my father and a much younger Elizabeth, sitting on a picnic blanket in what looked like the public garden. Between them was a toddler version of myself, maybe 2 years old. Laughing as I reached for the camera, we looked ... happy. A normal, joyful family with no hint of the fractures to come. I found it while cleaning out the last of my things from the house, Elizabeth explained, her voice softer than usual. I thought you should have it. I ran my finger over the image. This evidence of a time before the arguments, before the silences, before he left and she retreated into her work and I became the disappointing daughter. We look happy. We were, she said simply. Not always, not perfectly. But yes, there were happy times worth remembering. Daniel squeezed my knee under the table, a silent gesture of support as I swallowed against the unexpected lump in my throat. Thank you, I managed, closing the box carefully and tucking it into my purse. This means a lot. Elizabeth nodded, accepting my gratitude without pushing for more emotional display than I could manage in that moment. Another change from the mother who had always demanded I control or concealed my feelings in public. Our appetizers arrived, providing a welcome shift in the emotional weather. The conversation moved to lighter topics. Daniel's plans for the summer menu at the restaurant where he now worked as assistant manager. My upcoming presentation at a literacy conference. Elizabeth's surprising enjoyment of her watercolor class. I'm terrible at it, she admitted with a frankness that the old Elizabeth would never have allowed. Absolutely dreadful. But there's something liberating about being bad at something with no consequences. That's exactly what I tell my students, I said, delighted by this unexpected connection. That it's okay to be bad at something new, that making mistakes is how we learn. Wise teacher, she said with a small smile. Wiser than her mother, perhaps. By the time our main courses arrived, the initial tension had dissolved completely. We ate and talked and laughed in a way that felt almost normal. As if this was something we'd done 100 times before, rather than the carefully orchestrated reconciliation dinner it actually was. Between the main course and dessert, Daniel excused himself to use the restroom, leaving Elizabeth and me alone for the first time that evening. He's a good man, she said once he was out of earshot. Steady. Kind. Sees you clearly. He is, I agreed, warmth spreading through me at her assessment. I got lucky. Not luck, Elizabeth corrected gently. Discernment. You chose well, Emma. Better than I did with your father, if I'm being honest. The omission so contrary to the narrative she'd maintained throughout my childhood of my father as the sole villain in their marital collapse stunned me into momentary silence. You never said that before, I finally managed. About Dad? You always made it sound like he was entirely to blame for leaving. Elizabeth sipped her wine, considering her words carefully. It was easier that way. For both of us, I thought, to have a clear villain rather than the messier truth. Which was that we were both flawed people who loved each other once but couldn't find a way to keep loving each other through those flaws, she said quietly. He left, yes, but I pushed him away long before that. My ambition, my perfectionism, my inability to be satisfied with what we had instead of what I thought we should have. She met my eyes directly. Sound familiar? The parallel to our own relationship hung in the air between us, neither of us needing to state it explicitly. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because you're building something with Daniel, she replied. Something that could be lasting. And I don't want you to repeat my mistakes to push away someone who loves you because they don't fit some perfect image in your head. Is that what you think I did with you? The question slipped out before I could stop it. No, she said, surprising me again. What you did with me was set a boundary I needed to respect. What I did was finally learn to see you as you actually are, not as the daughter I imagined you should be. She reached across the table and briefly touched my hand, another of those small physical gestures that had been so rare in our old relationship. I'm still learning, Emma. But I'm trying. I know, I said softly. So am I. Daniel returned, sliding back into his seat with a warm smile. Did I miss anything important? Elizabeth and I exchanged a look, a moment of perfect understanding between two women working to rebuild a relationship from its broken pieces. Just a little mother-daughter chat, Elizabeth said lightly. Nothing, but it had been, in its own quiet way, another brick in the foundation of this new relationship we were constructing, not the mother-daughter dynamic I'd longed for as a child, but something more honest, more equal, more real. After dessert, though, tiramisu Daniel had promised was indeed exceptional. We stood outside the restaurant in the mild spring evening, that awkward moment of parting approaching. Thank you for dinner, I said to Elizabeth. It was healing, being back here under better circumstances. It was my pleasure, she replied. Then, with uncharacteristic hesitation, she added, I was thinking of hosting a small dinner party next month. Nothing formal, just a few friends. I'd love for you both to come. The invitation, so normal, so ordinary, yet so significant in the context of our history, caught me by surprise. Elizabeth hadn't entertained at home since retiring, as far as I knew. This was another step forward, another door opening between us. We'd like that, I said, glancing at Daniel for confirmation. He nodded, squeezing my hand. Just let us know when. I won't. She hesitated again, then stepped forward and did something she hadn't done in years. She hugged me, brief and a bit stiff, but a real embrace nonetheless. Good night, Emma. Good night, Elizabeth, I replied, the name still new on my tongue but feeling more natural each time I used it. As she walked toward the waiting Uber she'd ordered, Daniel wrapped an arm around my waist. You okay? I leaned into his solid warmth, watching my mother know Elizabeth disappear into the car. Yeah, I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. I really am. We started walking toward the tea station, the night air cool but pleasant on our skin. Above us, stars twinkled faintly against the city's light pollution, distant but present if you knew where to look. "You know what I was thinking about during dinner?" Daniel asked as we strolled. "What's that?" "How different things might have been if I hadn't chased after you that night," he said. "If I hadn't told you she'd paid for everything." I considered this the strange, winding path that had led us here, from that humiliating night to this peaceful evening, from strangers to family in our own unconventional way. "I've thought about that too," I admitted, "but I think maybe we would have found our way here eventually. Maybe not as quickly, maybe not as directly, but I like to believe we'd have gotten here somehow." "The optimistic teacher in you," he teased gently. "Maybe," I agreed with a smile. "Or maybe just the daughter who's finally learning to see her mother as a complete person, not just the role she played in my life." We stopped at a street corner, waiting for the light to change. In the distance, I could see the illuminated dome of the State House, a landmark I'd always associated with permanence, with history, but even that had changed over time. Bonn restored, reimagined, while maintaining its essential character. "She really is trying," Daniel observed. "It's beautiful to see." "We both are," I said, thinking of the photograph, now tucked safely in my purse, that evidence of happier times. Not as a painful reminder of what was lost, but as proof that connection was possible, that love, however imperfect, had existed between us and could exist again in a new form. The light changed, and we crossed the street, moving forward together, step by step. Just as Elizabeth and I were doing in our carefully reconstructed relationship, moving forward, not back to what once was, but towards something new. Something real. She had paid for everything that first night at Marcello's meal, the wine, even in some ways the argument that had followed, but what she was offering now was something far more valuable, herself, unfiltered and imperfect, her regrets, her memories, her hope for a different future than our painful past. And I was offering the same in return. Not forgiveness. Exactly that word was too simple for the complex emotional terrain we were navigating, but understanding, acceptance. A willingness to see beyond the roles we've played for so long to the complicated, flawed, loving humans beneath. "Do you think she'll actually cook for this dinner party, or will it be Daniel asked as we descended the steps to the tea station. I laughed, the sound echoing in the tiled entrance. "Definitely catered. Some things don't change, but some things do. Some things can transform so gradually you hardly notice, until one day you find yourself laughing about your mother's inability to cook instead of crying about her inability to love you the way you needed. Until you find yourself calling her by her first name and seeing her not as the monolithic mother, but as Elizabeth, a woman with her own story, her own wounds, her own capacity for growth." 6 months ago, I had fled this restaurant in tears, certain that nothing would ever change between us. Tonight, I was walking away with a photograph of happier times, an invitation to dinner, and the warm memory of her awkward but genuine hug. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't complete. There would still be missteps and old habits and moments when the past threatened to overshadow our tentative new present. But it was real. It was true. It was enough. She had paid for everything, and so had I. And somehow, against all odds, we were both finding it had been worth the price.